is LBC. Call Clegg. Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg takes your calls with Nick Ferrari at breakfast. 0845 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Leading Britain's conversation. This is Call Clegg on LBC.
It's 9 o'clock on Thursday, the 8th of April. That means it's time for Call Clegg with me, Nick Clegg, here on LBC. I will be taking your questions for the next half an hour, so do get in touch on 0845 6060 973. Email at nickclegg@lbc.co.uk. And, of course, you can watch as well on the website lbc.co.uk. So let's go to the first caller. First caller is Yusuf in Edmonton. Hello, Yusuf.
Hi.
Hello. Hi. Can you hear me?
Hello. Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're on air, Yusuf. Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, my question was relating to yesterday's calls regarding halal meat.
Yes.
Halal chicken. My point is that why is it a problem? Because it's regarding Islam, if halal meat becomes a problem.
This, I think, is the story. Just to check, Yusuf, this is a story that was done by the Sun newspaper. The Pizza Express are routinely serving chicken pizzas, chicken salads, and they are not informing the diners that the meat is halal, and there was considerable concern, not so much that it is halal meat, it's whether consumers should be told as to how exactly the chicken, or indeed any of the meat, has been prepared. That was what the row was about. The story has kicked on a little bit today. Another newspaper has been to all sorts of supermarkets and stores. Stay on the line, Yusuf. Let's get an initial reaction from the Deputy Prime Minister.
I think actually, Yusuf, Nick Ferrari just sort of put his finger on it. It's just a question of making sure that when people buy something in the supermarket or in Pizza Express or wherever, they're given basic information about how that food and how that meat has been prepared. I think that's what surprised people. It's not people sort of throwing up their hands in sort of, rejection of halal meat as such. It's just I think people want to know how they're, I quite understandably consumers want to know more and more about how the food arrived on their plate, so to speak. And then there's this issue, which I think has been highlighted today by a joint letter from both Jewish and Muslim community leaders about particular concern that consumers should know whether the animal's been stunned before slaughter. So I think it's really about consumer information, Yusuf. I didn't quite hear your full question, Yusuf, rather than some reaction to halal itself. Do
you want to really articulate what you exactly want to hear from the Deputy Prime Minister one last time, Yusuf?
Yeah.
What is
basically, obviously, my point is, obviously, I do understand, obviously, if I go into a shop, I eat halal meat myself, I'm Muslim. I go into a shop, I would ask the shopkeeper whether this meat is halal. And I totally understand that. And I don't discriminate anybody else going to a shop and asking if it's not halal. At the end of the day, if somebody doesn't want to eat halal meat, that's entirely up to them.
Yeah.
If people that want to sell halal meat, that's entirely up to them, because obviously it gathers business, because there is a big Muslim community within the UK. So I don't see now why it's a problem. I don't see why now it's a problem, because a long time ago when I was in school, it never mattered. We went to a chicken shop with my mates. No one really cared about if it was halal or not halal.
Yeah, no. I mean, Yusuf, I think the point is this. My understanding is that what is emerging is that for some big retailers, for instance, I think is it New Zealand?
Yes, New Zealand lamb.
New Zealand lamb. Apparently there's a lot of exports of New Zealand lamb to the Middle East and to parts of the world where halal meat is eaten by everybody. So I get the impression that, just to simplify things, they're just producing halal meat as a matter of course. I think, though I need to double check, certainly in the instances I heard about on the radio this morning, that meat is being produced where animals are stunned first before slaughtered. And so that's just, if you like, that's just the way they're being produced on the other side of the planet in New Zealand, because it's simpler for them to do it in that way. I think what this has revealed is that, not that people say, well, therefore I won't eat that meat. I personally got absolutely no problem of eating a pizza with halal meat on it at all. It's just a question of telling consumers.
So where do we go with this, Deputy Prime Minister? Do we need a labelling? There are supermarkets who say that, yes, we do label halal lamb. Yeah. There are others that saying we don't label halal lamb products.
I think there should be more information.
Because particularly say for a Jewish or a Sikh person and they're buying lamb, this is an issue and they need to know.
Yeah, I think it's just a question of... there's a whole lot of information that we now have on the products we buy that we didn't some years ago. And I think this is something that should be relatively straightforward, because obviously this is all totally traceable.
It just needs the letter H on it or something, like that.
Totally traceable, exactly. You can have a symbol. So I think I'm right in saying that Pizza Express, for instance, had the information on their website, but not on their menus.
But who checks the website?
Hello,
darling, I'm taking you out for dinner. Let's get on the website.
I'm a great fan of Pizza Express, but you're right, I don't dwell on their website before I actually
tuck into a pizza. Are you a great fan of Pizza Express, Deputy Prime Minister?
I'm a big pizza fan, I have to say.
What is your favourite pizza?
Oh, I think Fiorentina.
There's a lot of cheese in it.
There's a lot of cheese in it.
A lot of cheese.
Exactly.
Okay, we move on from pizza.
Any more details?
No.
No.
You go large. No, we won't do that again. That's the burger bar. We move on.
John, thanks for that, Yusuf. John in Wallingham. Hello, John.
Hello, Nick. Yeah, I was shocked to hear that your friend Mr. Cameron's thinking of bringing in harsh measures where he's going to put people in prison for carrying a knife for the second time when they get caught. Is that right?
So, John, the debate is this, and it's quite important to be clear about it, because I think people are kind of quite understandably, this is dividing opinion, but it's just quite important to, focus on what this issue is. This is about whether, as you quite rightly said, what sentences are handed down to people who are caught simply carrying a knife. So not doing something with it, not committing an offence with it, just possession. I keep reading the papers. This is about, a second offence. It's about just carrying a knife. That's the first point. And the second point is, my view is there may well be cases where a judge should imprison someone for that, right? All I'm saying is I don't think everybody in all circumstances at all times should be chucked into prison when they're found carrying a knife the second time, regardless of the circumstances. That's all. And the reason I think this is because I just think we've got to be smart. And sometimes you can sort of sound terribly tough. And of course I understand intuitively. It's why... how can I put this? This is an election time. It's not the easiest thing politically to sort of be somehow accused of being soft on knife crime. I'm not soft on knife crime at all. In fact, this government has passed new offences on the statute, put new criminal offences on the statute book. So, for instance, if you threaten someone with a knife in a public place or in a school, you can be imprisoned for up to 4 years. That's because of a law that we have passed. I just think to say that if you are found to be carrying a knife for the second time, having had a previous knife-related offence, that in all circumstances, all time, no exceptions, no questions asked, you'll end up in prison. Seems to me to be a very blunt way of going about things, and could definitely have the effect of putting into prison, for instance, a young girl who's been coerced by a senior gang member to carry a knife for him or her. You end up chucking the young, if you like, almost victim of bullying within a gang into prison. You then almost certainly put that young individual onto a kind of treadmill where they become tomorrow's hardened criminal. And actually the people who you do want in prison or you do want to see in court get away scot-free. So that's my only point, which is, yes, let's be really tough on knife crime, but let's be smart about how we're tough on knife crime. Let's not just simply catch headlines in a way which doesn't necessarily deal with the problem.
An observation from me. When was the last time a young girl was charged, let alone convicted, of a knife crime of fatality?
I don't know all the individual
the reality
sentences.
Is it doesn't happen. It's young men carrying knives, isn't it?
No, there's quite a lot of evidence. If you speak to a lot of people
I've never heard of a young woman being prosecuted for knife crime for using a knife.
But they would be under this arrangement. You see, this is the whole point. If you speak to people who know a lot more about gang members than I do, they will tell you it increasingly happens that senior gang members will coerce a more vulnerable or younger gang member, often not always girls, to carry knives for them. Under this arrangement, if you went ahead with this, that girl would end up in prison. No questions asked, no circumstances can be taken into consideration. The judge has got no discretion at all. All I'm saying is, yes, bang people up who should be banged up. Yes, let's strengthen the law where people threaten you with a knife. We've done that already. But saying that someone should always, no exceptions at all, end up in prison because they have a penknife in their pocket or a knife in their pocket, having had a previous knife-related offence, I think that actually would rebound on us.
John, a quick reaction from you.
Well, so if Mr. Cameron's saying if they get caught twice, how many times are these people being caught in the first place? And how are elderly people meant to sleep in their bed when you've got lunatics in suits like him looking after this country? You've created these monsters out there. You like it. You've got all your lawyer mates all earning money out of it, the system, legal aid. Help all the criminals, Clegg.
Right.
I don't know if you want to respond to that. I mean, it's a view, John. Thank you. I should say we spoke to Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe about this earlier in the programme, Deputy Prime Minister. It's interesting that you seem to know as a politician more than our police chiefs do.
Well, I'm afraid I don't agree with him. I think, we know that there sometimes can be an excuse or a reasonable excuse for carrying a knife. People who are working, electricians, obviously, they need to carry knives. I think we all understand that, and occasionally somebody by mistake might take into the street a knife that they had at home or at work. I think we all understand that. But I think where we're getting gang members or young people carrying knives and there is no excuse, then that's a serious matter for me. And I'm afraid knives generally do one thing, which is they either wound people, and if they wound people, they might kill them. So for me, it's vital we send a clear message to our young people. And the only final thing I'll mention, Nick, about 6 to 8 weeks ago, I visited Feltham, which is the local Young Offenders Institute, talked to some gang members there, and I was asking them, we seem to have seen less carrying of guns, why is that? And they said, well, because we know we'll get 5 years, minimum sentence for carrying a handgun, 5 years. And I said, well, what about knives? I said, well, I'm not sure what, they didn't know what the sentence was. So I think they do hear simple messages, they've heard it about guns, I think they need to hear about knives.
Deputy Prime Minister, that was what's known as Britain's top cop, Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe.
No, listen, I've got a great deal of respect for Bernard Hogan. I fundamentally disagree with him. Actually, what he's said...
the Chief Police Officer. Surely he knows better than a politician, Mr. Clegg.
To be fair, the police, quite understandably, often say that they want new powers in the statute book, and often Parliament and politicians say, now, hang on a minute, we don't just constantly put new offences on the statute, but without considering the knock-on effect on the prison population, on rates of reoffending. Now, Bernard Hogan-Howe, for instance, said, well, of course, sometimes people might kind of wander out of their home with a knife on them and not really remember it, and they've done it innocently. The point is, under this arrangement, that person would end up in prison because there are no extenuating circumstances. It's really important to remember this. I'm saying put people in prison who should be in prison, right?
It's worked with guns, is what Sir Bernard would say.
But all I'm saying is that under all circumstances, no exceptions, no discretion, no allowance, exactly for the circumstances that Bernard Hogan-Howe has just mentioned. In other words, someone has got a knife on their possession, they have no intention of doing anything with it, but they so happen to have it on their person. That individual, under this arrangement, would end up in prison for several months. And I think the more you chuck people into prison, without any ability for judges to make their own minds up about what is the appropriate sentence to fit the crime. The evidence shows we've done this in the past. Previous governments have done this. Labour did this. They chuck more and more people in prison. What happens is you actually end up creating this revolving door where you get more crime created rather than less crime. All my political life, I know it's difficult because I know people just want to think there's some instant solution for every single crime under the sun, but all my life I've always believed that the best way to deal with crime, and by the way, crime is now at its lowest level under our government than it's been since records began. It's better to be smart on crime than sound tough, but actually end up doing things which help increase crime. Just lastly on this, but it worked with guns. I have to stress that point that we just heard from the Commissioner. He says it's worked with guns. Why would it not work with knives? Listen, guns, you shouldn't... Of course, guns are... And absolutely, this is a total prohibition in our society on carrying guns. Understand that. What I am saying is that... Well, not if you're a farmer. But as Bernard Hogan-Howe said, if you walk out of your home with a penknife, right, and you have a previous knife-related offence on, against your name, as he said, you might think that's understandable, but under this arrangement proposed by the Conservatives, that person would end up in prison. Do you honestly see that, Mr. Clegg? Well, that is what the law. That is what the law would say. Go to jail for carrying a penknife, or a fisherman. In all honesty, that is exactly what would happen under this arrangement. It would be laughed out of court. What discretion is in the word mandatory? This is the point. If you basically say that no exceptions. With no exceptions at all, every individual caught carrying a knife, who's had a previous offence, ends up in prison. That is exactly what would happen. That is what the law of the land would be. And all I'm saying is judges should chuck people in prison, absolutely, for those second or even third or fourth offences. But a knife isn't as dangerous as a gun, isn't it? Of course it can be, and that's one of the reasons why we've introduced new offences, something I actively supported, that if you use a knife in a threatening way in a school or a public place, you should expect to get a very, very serious punishment. That wasn't the law before. It has been because of the changes we've introduced. We've probably taken too long, Mr. Clegg. Move on. No, it's an important issue. It's a very important issue. Okay, Scott in Charlton. Hello, Scott.
Hiya.
Hello.
Good morning. Basically, my question is, why does the government constantly prohibit cannabis?
Well, why does it prohibit cannabis? We've got a real problem in our country. In fact, we've got a problem across the world, which is that the so-called war on drugs is not working. The number of fatalities related to drugs in our country is now about 2,000 people are dying a year. The drugs industry is a multi-billion-pound industry. The criminals who run these drug cartels across the world are playing cat and mouse with the police and law enforcement agencies. You're having more and more new synthetic drugs being brought onto the market. And my point is not actually, it's always been, it's not just about one categorisation of one drug, whether it's cannabis or other drugs, but we should look at this in the round and we should ask ourselves, are we winning this campaign against the ever increasing use of drugs, and the particularly how do we protect children from becoming drug users at an alarmingly young age? And I think that's why we need to take a sort of grown-up look at this. And again, it's actually slight relation to our earlier conversation. There's no point just sounding tough on the war on drugs if actually you end up losing the war on drugs, and that's what I think's been going on for many, many years.
You've called for a royal commission, I understand. So explain to the listeners what that would achieve, or what you hope it would achieve.
A Royal Commission is just a really kind of rather sort of pompous title for just getting some people around the table who know what they're talking about, who are given the authority to look at this in the round and give clear, coherent, objective recommendations to any changes that the government of the day needs to make in order to deal with drugs more effectively. And when I say deal with drugs more effectively, I think one of the really crucial things is to make sure that people who are addicted to drugs, that you deal with their addiction. They've got a health issue as much as anything else, so that you can separate them off from the criminal gangs who are providing their drugs. If you constantly criminalise those people who become victims of the drug peddlers, all you actually end up doing is driving them into the hands of those drug peddlers again and again and again.
So you're as yet undecided in a way. You want to hear more evidence.
Oh, I just want to be led by the evidence, and I just kind of think in any other walk of life, if you had 2,000 fatalities a year, if your enemy was making more and more, fatter and fatter profits every year, if they were producing ever more sophisticated weapons, if I can put it like that, ever more sophisticated products, which were evading you, you'd kind of conclude that your present approach wasn't working.
But you're not yet persuaded of decriminalisation. I
don't actually think, by the way, that legalisation is the magic wand answer to all of this. I think, and I've hinted at it earlier, I think dealing with people who are hooked on drugs as a health issue and not just a criminal justice issue would already make a very, very big step. The more you can separate them off, deal with their problem, so they don't continually remain in the hands as victims in the hands of the drug peddlers, that would already make a big difference. But no, I'm open-minded about this. I want to be led by the evidence. I actually think the British public, my own view, has long gone well beyond the kind of political and media sort of narrative on this. So I think most people have nieces, nephews, brothers, sisters, cousins who've either had trouble with drugs or know people who have. It's so widespread now. People know the present approach is not really working.
You won't be surprised, there's an email relating to this. Graham in Bushy, you seem to be promoting the legalisation of cannabis. Can you confirm whether you have ever taken or used any illegal drugs?
I'm not going to get into what I have or haven't done in my distant sort of past, because I don't think that's really relevant. All I do care about is that we deal with drugs in a grown-up and intelligent way. And as I said, for the reasons that I explained, I'm not sure if we've got it right.
Nigel in Leicester. Hey, we found one. I'm a Lib Dem. Nigel in Leicester. There we are.
Don't be so facetious.
I'm a Lib Dem. My heart sank when I opened the paper at the weekend to see we're, I assume the Lib Dems, behind the Greens. What are you going to do about it, Nick? He's still being friendly. We've got him. Nigel, your voter.
Who's that, Nigel? Well,
Nigel in Leicester.
Get out there, Nigel, and knock on doors. That's what we've got to do about it. That's exactly what I'm doing
But you're behind the Greens.
Oh, come on. That's one poll. And look...
Let's just say, come on, it's still fairly relevant.
Well, I'm not a pollster or a pundit. I'm a leader of a political party.
This poor old Nigel, you've broken his heart.
No, Nigel, the way to restore your broken heart is to go out and campaign and shout from the rooftops of what we've done for the British people in terms of securing this economic recovery, giving people tax cuts, giving people decent pensions.
But why isn't the message getting through?
Well, because you keep asking me about polls rather than actually asking me about the things we've achieved. I think when people hear about the things we've achieved... And look, let me... A bit more serious reply. I think serious response to Nigel is some of the things that we believe in, of course, aren't universally popular. I mean, you and I have just had a long discussion about knife crime. The easiest thing in the world for a politician is to go into a studio like this and say, "Oh, I'm going to be really tough and pass a new law."
Good idea.
Exactly.
I'll do that tomorrow.
Exactly. And actually, the evidence shows it doesn't work. So it's not, it's not the most fashionable thing to say, "Hang on a minute, let's just do what works." Drugs, another thing. Actually, the most easiest thing to do, and most other politicians from most other parties do this. Oh yeah, we must carry on fighting the war on drugs, regardless of whether it's working. Europe's another example. It's not universally popular to say that we should be in Europe. There are a lot of people who say we should come out. But we can't stop saying what we believe in, and we certainly can't stop saying what we believe in when we've got a really good track record now of delivering an economic recovery, delivering fairness, delivering tax cuts for people on millions of people on low and middle incomes, and that's what Nigel and I should go out and talk about, rather than one fleeting poll here or there. And that's precisely what I'm going to do, by the way, in the northwest later today, where I'm travelling hot from here. What?
Perhaps you could drop off at Leicester and say hi to Nigel.
Leicester's in the East Midlands, in case
my mum's from Leicester. She was from Leicester. Yeah. At least they've got a great soccer team. Nigel, come for yourself and keep the faith with the Lib Dems. We move on to other phone calls.
Yeah, they got into the Premiership.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they go up next season. Yeah.
Chris in Hampstead. Hello, Chris.
Good morning to Nick and Nick.
Hello, sir.
Just turning to Nigeria and this awful stuff, as you call it, tragedy with these girls. I really want to know what the government's been doing for the last 3-4 weeks. Have we really been sitting on our hands and doing nothing? I mean, surely we could have seen this coming. Surely we had intelligence of behaviour of certain groups within Nigeria. Because if we don't, then the world is really an unsafe place.
The crude answer, Chris, is I think it's very difficult for governments outside Nigeria to sort of unilaterally fix this terrible ongoing violence in the northeast and the north of the country, which has been going on for some time now, driven by this totally warped ideology, Boko Haram. Of course, everybody's been aware of the horrific violence that these fanatics have inflicted on fellow Nigerians for a very long period of time. This is actually, in many ways, I think the first time many people have heard about it. So everyone's been aware of this. But at the end of the day, we have to work with the Nigerians. David Cameron spoke to the Nigerian president yesterday. We've agreed to send a small team to help them out. The French are also sending experts. The Americans are sending experts. That's what we're doing. Could that have been done the day after these girls disappeared? Well, arguably it could have been done, but we can only react to the requests made by the Nigerian government. We can't sort of just fly in to another country and somehow solve a problem of this complexity, and which has been going on for such a long period of time. Should
President Jonathan have been doing more about this previous months? One could even ask at previous years, Mr. Clegg.
Well, look, I think it's really, really difficult for politicians like me to start providing, wisdom with hindsight or from a distance to something which is as complex and as difficult as all of this. But I can totally understand, I mean, who wouldn't, that if you are the sister, the brother, the aunt, the uncle, the mother and the father of one of these girls who've missed, you would be absolutely livid that there wasn't an apparent reaction from the authorities more quickly, and it's only been because these families have been so brave to demonstrate and make their voice heard that the rest of the world has woken up, and now action's been taken. And frankly,
you support the use of British special forces?
I'm not going to comment on special forces.
Well, you can say whether you support the use or not. I'm not asking.
I'm not going to provide a running commentary on what
but
special forces.
Do you support the use of them?
I'm simply not going to provide. We'd never comment on special forces. What I am saying is that 3 weeks.
How many? I'm just saying.
I'm just not going to do it. Okay, we just don't. We don't comment on. We don't comment on special forces. I know, but you've asked it 3 times. So I give the same answer 3 times. What I do think is that, given this happened 3 weeks ago, given these terrorists and these fanatics are as violent and unhinged as they are, I think it is a good thing that the Nigerian government is now reaching to other governments, including our own, to get more help to try and deal with this, because it's been going on for a very, very long period of time and it's destabilised a huge swathe of Nigeria.
A quick response from you, Chris, from what you've heard.
Well, I find it amazing that Nick says we can't intervene, yet we're able to intervene around the world when it suits. And I'm just wondering whether there's a sort of a financial edge to this, that we're just ignoring Nigeria because it's of no value to us as a country.
Oh, Chris, you're not. Do you seriously think that it would be an easy and straightforward thing to do, to sort of just go in and sort out a country the size of Nigeria? It's the largest economy, the most populous country in one of the most populous countries in Africa. This bloody conflict's been going on for a very long period of time, and I wish I could wave a magic wand and stop these things from happening. I really do think we shouldn't kid ourselves that there are somehow sort of ready-made solutions to these kind of violent conflicts.
All right, let's move on. Thank you, Chris. Can I do an email for you, please?
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. This comes in from Wendy in Kent. Oh, that's interesting. Is the AstraZeneca deal good for Britain? I wonder if Wendy lives near Sandwich, which, of course, is the possible threatened jobs down there in East Kent. Yeah. Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, this is exactly the kind of thing that we're focusing on now, is to make sure that where there's any takeover of one company after another, and of course takeovers happen all the time, that particularly in a sector as important to the British economy as the life science and science sector, jobs are protected, research is protected, excellence in science is protected, and we've got a big stake in this because we spend a lot of taxpayers' money making sure that we, for instance, one of the big decisions we've taken, not universally popular, was actually to protect the amount of money, public money, that goes into science compared to all the cuts and savings we've had to make elsewhere, and that's why we're being very exacting in our discussions with Pfizer when they've approached members of the government and said, look, you're talking the talk now about the assurances that you're giving about the continuation of manufacturing and research and science facilities in the UK, but walk the walk. How do you make these commitments stick? And that's what we are really focusing on. At the end of the day, it's not, the government has to remain neutral. It's for the companies
themselves.
Other
countries, of course, have blocked some similar sort of deals. French, is far more protectionist, aren't they, than Britain?
No, the French are. Look, we take a general view as a country, and have done for a long time. This is across parties, by the way. Interestingly, of course, it was Labour that actually reduced the powers that governments have to intervene in these things, and now they're getting on their high horse. But we have taken a general view as a country that, overall, it is better to be open to people pouring money into the British economy in exactly the same way it's a good thing for British companies to go and invest massively in the United States, for instance. But that doesn't mean it's a free-for-all, and it doesn't mean we don't have major public interests to protect. Now, some of the protections that we can secure are through formal legal powers. Quite a lot of it, particularly in this instance, is us saying, look, hang on, the government is a major player now and in the future in how support is provided to the science and research communities in this country. This matters to us massively. We're a world leader in all of this. And that's why I think it is easy, frankly, for a company like Pfizer to ignore what government is saying, and that's why we're saying very unambiguously, you're making some encouraging noises about what you would do if this deal were to go ahead. It might not, but if it were to go ahead, you've got to persuade us that those are commitments which really are binding.
Despite that extraordinary display of truculence a few moments ago, I've enjoyed our 18 months together. I'm somewhat
Nick, I'm sorry, have I
Well, you're a very charming person. And I was at a reception yesterday with someone who you seem to continually snub. I was with Her Majesty the Queen as part of the journalist charity.
How dare you suggest I snub the Queen?
And I was reminded, not by her, I was reminded by others, that, of course, you reportedly regularly don't go to your audiences and you snub Her Majesty, having spent time with her. Why would that be?
Well, it's nonsense. It's complete nonsense. I am a huge admirer and fan of Her Majesty, and I am, as it happens, I'm not sure, you might be surprised it is, I'm Lord President of the Privy Council.
Well, it'd be nice to turn up then sometimes.
I turn up regularly and dutifully, and I enjoy it, and it's a duty I enjoy discharging very occasionally, because of all sorts of reasons, maybe because I'm out of the country or whatever.
Once it was me.
Was it?
Yes.
No.
It was reported that you came here.
No.
She was furious. No, she wasn't. Can I just say, without sharing your comments, she is so incredibly switched on everything.
Yes.
My God.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Absolute pleasure to spend time with. It really was. It's fantastic. We move on to other calls.
Adam in New Denham.
Hello there. Yeah, in keeping with the vein of law and order, most of my working life I was a prison officer.
Yeah.
But I would like to just correct you about the Bergen-Belsen knife thing. It's on conviction, not the you seem to give the idea to people that it would be, if anybody was stopped just having a knife going to work, if they're an electrician, it's on second conviction. And that only is if the CPS or the police decide to bring the prosecution. So I must correct you on that.
No.
You say not, Mr. Clegg, just to clarify.
No, what has been proposed is that you have a mandatory prison sentence for possession.
Yes, I think that's what Chris Grayling is saying now, Adam.
Only if it goes to trial.
Well, no, but if something goes to trial, if there is an offence which you have committed, and this is creating a new offence which doesn't presently exist. That's what's being proposed.
So it's only if the CPS preferred actually run charges, put charges forward, then, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but the CPS, the CPS, like everybody,
around with a penknife.
No, the CPS, like everybody, is bound by the law. If you create a new offence, Adam, which doesn't it is Adam, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, Adam.
Which doesn't currently exist for possession, then obviously the CPS, the police and everybody have to act on that because that becomes the law of the land. That's not presently the case. So of course convictions would flow from the offences which would be created, namely possessing a knife, not committing an offence, possessing, having had a knife-related offence against your name in the first place.
Adam, I know there's another point briefly on law and order you want to make. We're coming to our last minute, so go ahead, Adam.
We need more open prisons. But what we don't need, what we've seen recently, is people being sent from closed prisons down to open prisons, which I found when I was in the prison service, just to keep numbers down in closed prisons, which means also, if we're going to effectively tackle the causes of crime and offer rehabilitation to people, we need more closed prison space as well. This might seem bizarre. We need to tackle crime by locking more people up, because only by locking people up can we give them the interventions that they need to stop their criminal behaviour.
Just very quickly, Adam, two things. I mean, open prisons, as you know, have been around since the 1930s, so they've been a sort of part of the sort of fabric of our prison system for a long time. And they're, you know this better than I do, Adam, having worked in the prison service. They're a sort of gateway between prisons proper, so to speak, and normal life, and it's all about trying to create a kind of route, if you like, for people to become law-abiding, normal citizens again. The point you make about rehabilitation in prison is a really important one. Interestingly, as you know, the evidence is that, curiously enough, for the most serious offenders who are in prison for a long period of time, it's often easier to deliver proper education, training and rehabilitation for them and to change their behaviour because they're in prison for a fairly long period of time. Actually, those who commit the highest rates of reoffending are those who are in prison just for a few weeks, and that actually relates to the earlier conversation. I think if you chuck into prison thousands and thousands of people just because they have a knife on their person, even though they've done nothing, to commit an offence with it, but only for a few weeks, you are more likely to turn that young offender into a hardened criminal rather than actually change their behaviour. And where I totally agree with you, Adam, is prison isn't just about getting someone out of the way, it's also about changing their behaviour so that when they go out into society at large again, they don't go on to commit more crime.
Just before we come to the final question, I think for my listeners, when they hear open prison, Deputy Prime Minister, they're thinking the skull cracker, they're thinking Michael Wheatley, who has subsequently successfully been rearrested by the Met, 5 days on the run, short 13 life terms he got at the Bailey in 2001. Yeah. Should someone like that ever be in an open?
That's exactly why I think the case of Mr. Wheatley is now being reviewed, and also I think quite rightly why Chris Grayling is introducing new changes. For instance, people will have to wear tags in the future, so people can't just go walkabout when they are in that sort of in between phase between having been behind bars in a proper prison and going and being released into society. So I actually think what Chris Grayling is doing is very sensible to make sure that the public are reassured that people can't just wander off in the way that Mr. Wheatley appears to have done. Thankfully, he's been caught again.
He has. Last question.
Paul in Stoke-on-Trent. Hello, Paul.
Morning, Nick. The question is, are you offended by Labour's new election campaign about the drinking man, and would you support him in the next election in Parliament?
I actually haven't. I wanted to see it earlier. I'll probably see it later. I haven't seen it, Paul. I've been told by a friend that I will be more fearful and wary of the Downing Street cat from now on.
You are attacked by the cat. I'm
attacked by the cat.
Here's just only a brief part of it for you and for Paul.
This is the story of Nick Clegg, a man entrusted by a nation to act upon the policies he proposed. But he soon became the incredible shrinking man.
They spent money on this.
Having watched it,
particularly from Ed Miliband, who's the sort of missing man in British politics. We've got a European election campaign. He hasn't breathed a word about the issue we're supposed to be debating, which is whether we're in or out of Europe. But anyway,
having watched it, they've
obviously got money to burn.
It's about as edifying as England in a penalty shootout, I have to say. You're portrayed as being bullied and harassed and ignored. You are the uncredible shrinking man. The cabinet colleagues just laugh at you, and you get savaged by the number 10 cat.
Oh dear. From such an objective source. Yes.
You're not.
Unsurprisingly, I disagree.
You disagree, and you're not too bothered. All right. Well, I think even I agree with Nick on that one. Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg will be back with us here on LBC for Call Clegg, where news. Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Of course, where news is next.
Good morning, I'm Lisa Aziz. Nick Clegg's told LBC he's not soft on knife crime despite opposing Conservative plans for automatic jail terms for repeat offenders. The Deputy Prime Minister says it could turn young people into hardened